That's fine.
I did get a glass.
At your home.
That's the same, isn't it?
Yeah. That's a good point. You keep it at your home.
Is everyone ready? 5 o'clock?
Yeah.
Right. Good evening, everyone. I'm standing in because Councillor Lloyd is not here and he's asked me to sub for him, which, sorry about that.
That's good.
The evacuation procedure, we've got no members of the public, so, well, apart from yourselves, if we have a fire, downstairs out the front door, bang, we'll all make it.
Follow you.
If we can get across the road, that is. Apologies.
Councillor Ian Bonner with substitute Councillor Kondaka, Councillor June Tandy with substitute Councillor Jill Shepherd, Councillor Tony Lloyd and Dawn Dawson.
Chair, I'm subbing to Councillor Lloyd.
Okay. The minutes, is everybody happy to sign off the minutes of the last meeting?
I'm not sure this comes in here, but it's on the schedule of declarations of interests. Is that part of last time's minutes?
If it's a correction to that.
Yeah. Because you've got me down as Community Safety Ambassador and member of the Nuneaton and Bedworth Leisure Trust Board, which I'm not, no, either of them.
Neither.
No.
And is it on this one?
Which one?
Tonight?
It's on page 12.
Yeah, but is it on tonight as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, 12.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So I've been on the trust for a couple of years now.
Yes. So is that okay for me to sign off, as long as that's noted?
Yep.
Yeah. Please sign off. Is there any declarations of interest other than we need to take into consideration?
I sit on the Nuneaton and Bedworth Residents Partnership, and I'm also a member of the Residents Partnership. I'm also a member of NASCAR.
Councillor
The declarations are here for the last meeting, aren't they? Because I'm not on this one, so declare I'm county council for this one.
There isn't any public speaking tonight, as far as I know, so we can go straight on to the community safety partnerships.
Okay, good day. So firstly, I'd like to introduce our new Chief Inspector, Chief Inspector Dan Goddard, who has taken over from Chief Inspector Neil Harrison. Neil has been kind of a member of, well, not a member of this panel, but has reported to this panel for quite some time. He's currently conducting a 10-week, well, we think 10 weeks.
He's currently, Warwickshire and West Mercia Police are again going through some cost-cutting or cost-saving necessities, and he's gone off to work on a team to look at redesigning our policing model once again. 10-week timescale, but to be perfectly frank, I can see it being somewhat longer than that.
Okay, so Dav's here tonight to kind of support the questions that you'll inevitably have once we've gone through the performance report. You're all familiar with the performance reports. I don't see many new faces around the table, but I just wanted to put it into context. It's the final quarter report of 2016-17, so it compares the end of year figures for 2015-16 to the end of year figures in 2016-17. So a lot of the information that you're going to have there is kind of retrospective. I'll give you an update, well, I'll give you an overview of the performance, and then Daphne and I can update you on some of the emerging kind of changes in crime that have kind of come to fruition during the first quarter of this new financial year. Is that okay? So the priorities that we've got in here are what you guys have all had an input in as well. So you remember the strategic assessment's been to this board previously, it comes every year. You have the opportunity to shape our priorities, and then they're obviously endorsed by the Nuneaton Bedworth Safe Communities Partnership. Just as a kind of, you've obviously read the report, crime continues to look as though it's increasing. There are some favourable decreases at the end of quarter 4 in some areas. However, overwhelmingly for violence, we continue to see the ongoing trends that's mirrored across the county and across nationally really on the violent crime. So I'll take you through that. The other thing you've had as well is just a reminder of the briefing note that was circulated at the last OSP meeting. The briefing note came from the Chief Constable. NABSCOP had raised the concern over increasing in crime, particularly around violent crime. We raised it with the Chief Constable, and we raised it in what's called the Safer Warwickshire Partnership Board, which is a strategic partnership that looks over, covers the whole of Warwickshire. As a response, the Chief Constable has sent us the briefing note, which you've got in front of you, and that is what we discussed in the last meeting. I don't plan on going through that in any detail, but I just wanted to put it out there as a reminder that that's what we've considered. And it does offer an explanation in terms of what is happening around national kind of recording of crime, etc. So if we move on to Appendix A, which you've all got in front of you, and I'll take you through page by page. I'm looking at the top left-hand kind of table that's called the priorities, and if we look at the column that says year-end 16-17 when compared to 15-16, you'll see that for violence against a person and sexual offences, it had recorded a 31% increase. Below there's another increase, which is in terms of violence against a person with injury. So the VAP is violence against a person. That's increased by 13%. Violence against a person without injury has increased by 43%, and rape has increased by 4%. You'll see there a significant increase on other sexual offences, up by 77%. Burglary dwelling, or domestic burglaries as called on here, had decreased at the end of the quarter by 10%. A slight increase in burglary, so that's kind of outbuildings and sheds. And if you remember at the last meeting, we talked about the changes in recording. So we will no longer receive figures on burglary dwelling and burglary other. It will be residential burglary. Is that right? Everything's all lumped into one. So the next report you get for quarter 1 will have that information in there. It won't look like this. You'll see that there's been decreases in relation to antisocial behaviour, significant decreases in terms of deliberate small fires, and then overall total recorded crime has increased by 17%, predominantly driven by that increase within the violent crime area. The table below tells you the same thing, but it actually gives you the figures, so I don't propose to go through that. If you look at the right-hand side, you can see the trend line, the trend chart for violence against a person and sexual offences kind of continues to go up. Beneath that, the acquisitive crime offences around domestic burglary and burglary other kind of fluctuates, but again it's kind of a decreasing picture. And then beneath that, you'll see that the 3 different antisocial behaviour incident types outlined. So the top one is all ASB incidents, and you'll see that it's kind of decreasing, particularly from when you look at 2014. In relation to nuisance, which is the kind of ASB type with the most volume, again, it's steady. I don't believe there's an increase. No, there's not an oh yes, no, there isn't. There's a slight decrease on nuisance. For personal, and personal for us as a partnership is really important. The personal ASB is the kind of the area where we look at the vulnerability of people. So on here it kind of follows a fairly even trend line, and the same for environmental. Environmental is kind of the smallest category of antisocial behaviour that we record. So if we turn over the page, there's information there about domestic violence. So a historical request from this board was to try and understand the domestic violence elements of total violence against a person with injury offences. So you'll see that in 16-17, at the end of the quarter, there were 1,410 total violence against a person with injury offences. Of that, there were 478 related to domestic abuse. That roughly equates to 34%. And that is pretty much what we expect, around that 30% mark. If that increases that figure, it's really good. We want more people to come forward and report domestic abuse, so it's positive if that does increase. You'll see beneath that the trend line for total recorded crime slightly upturned at the end. And again, if we move over to the right, antisocial behaviour, you can see the different figures there. So again, as I said previously, nuisance is the greatest volume, followed by personal, followed by environmental. Beneath that, you'll see the cross-cutting themes. So these aren't necessarily these aren't the priorities for NABSCOT. These are the themes that we kind of keep a watching brief on. So you'll see that for all vehicle crime, there was an increase in all vehicle crime. So vehicle crime, correct me if I'm wrong, is theft from vehicles, theft of motor vehicles and vehicle interference. And within that, beneath that, you'll see that theft from vehicles had significantly, well I say significantly, is quite high, had increased. Theft of vehicles had also increased slightly. Beneath that, there are the hate offences and the crimed incidents there. And you'll see that compared to last year, where there were 167 incidents recorded, there were 207 at the end of the quarter, which again reflects the national picture, and is that we want more people to report it. So whilst it's not great that more people are being exposed to hate crimes, it is good that people are coming forward and reporting them to us. And then beneath that, you'll see cybercrime, and cybercrime's increased from last year too. Move over to the final page, which on occasions is slightly misleading, because what it does do is it compares offences and incidents against the last quarter, the previous year. It doesn't necessarily show you where the greatest volume is. So you'll see there across the borough the areas where offences have increased and where offences have decreased. And then at the end column, you've got the ASB incidents along there as well.
And just a clarification, you said the last quarter, it's actually the same quarter the year before?
Well, what we're doing on this is it's comparing the same period the previous year. So it says on here, recorded crime and offences by Police Week January to March 2017. So it will compare it to the same period in 2015, but what that means is 2015-16, like that financial year. So you're comparing
So it's January to March 2016 is what's compared.
2015, yeah, that's right. Yeah. So that concludes that part. So over to you guys for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Clearly there's some worrying aspects to a lot of these figures, particularly with the violence against persons. But I'm interested in the one that's violence against persons without injury. Big increase there, 43%. But does that, in that case, does that include things like the hate crime that you've just spoken about?
It could do. The violence without injury category is fairly broad, actually, and it includes crime types that you would expect. So a physical push that didn't cause an injury.
Yeah.
It could include some types of hate crime offences, but it also includes a much broader range of offences, such as oddly dangerous dogs jobs, harassment, kind of public order type offences where you're abused in the street. So it's quite a wide-ranging crime category, and it also includes offensive communications incidents. So hence we've seen this, of course, rise in social media-related insulting and offensive behaviour. So that corresponding rise will be reflected in that crime category, and that crime category is, I would suggest, the most susceptible to the new crime recording categories and integrity.
Yeah, okay. Because I'm also interested at no, I'm kind of being a little bit parochial, but with Bedworth Town Centre, the total offences have gone up, approximately 15%. And I'm kind of interested in that because Bedworth Town Centre no longer has any pub trade as such. You've only got Wetherspoons, that's all there is. And so I'm kind of interested in why we would get such a rise in that figures if it's probably not drink related.
Well, I think what we're seeing with, well, it again links back to the violence without injury category, which of course is then going to be reflected in the total offences category you just referred to, is that we are perhaps seeing a slight shift away from your more traditional nighttime economy type offences, so your alcohol-fuelled violence in the town centre, and we're seeing that proportion of incidents that are occurring perhaps within the home. That's reflected in domestic violence figures that you've just seen, which was about 37%, I think, percentage, which is perhaps on the slightly higher side than average, which is normally 30 or so. But of course, even when you break it down into ward level or beat level, in terms of overall offences, you're still encapsulating all these offences in terms of Facebook crime, over the phone harassment, or being abused, which is completely unacceptable, of course, but they're classified in the violence category. It's perhaps not as you would traditionally see violence as such. So does it mean that that particular location has become more violent? Not necessarily.
Yeah, okay. It was just when you said about domestic violence in the home. Well, in Bedworth we do have people living in the town centre, but not that many of them, so I wouldn't have thought that would be a big influence on that aspect. Just finally, Chair, I guess the most worrying thing of all is the increase in sexual related crimes and the violent crimes. And maybe the Chief Inspector, I don't know, I'll ask the question anyway. What is the relationship with that increase, do you think, against the budgetary restrictions that have been placed on policing in recent times?
That's a difficult question to answer, but it's probably best by starting with, because I have obviously recognised that increase in the sexual offences category, and actually, whilst these figures are end of Q4, if you look at Q1 for the start of this performance year, the figures are again showing an upturn. But actually, when you break that down, I have looked at the individual cases to try and get a feel for actually what is happening, what is the result in the background here. It's roughly, and it does vary slightly, but roughly 50% between current offences, so we would classify that as offences that have happened within the last 28 days, and non-recent offences. So we're having this big ongoing increase in offences reported to us that have happened 2 months ago to 20 years ago. So that's 50% of the recording. That leaves 50% for recent type offences, and actually within that category, when you break that down, we're talking a lot of, again, domestic type offences being reported, and we're talking a lot of referrals coming through from the multi-agency safeguarding hub, the MASH, if you've heard it referred to as that. So obviously, as our partner agencies are feeding into that central repository, we're now seeing a lot of recorded crime falling out of that. And again, it doesn't excuse the increase in figures at all, but it just gives some perspective behind what's going on at the moment. And I would suggest that some of the more concerning sexual offences, in terms of feeling safe within your community, would be offences in public spaces or predatory type stranger offences. And we're not seeing those types of patterns at the moment.
Yeah, and just finally, Chair, because all of that data is really interesting, but I guess the most important thing for us as a scrutiny panel is to find out how we move forward in tackling all those issues. And I've already mentioned about the constraints that people are having to work under.
Yeah.
So I guess as a scrutiny panel, we need to know what's going to happen to try and put those things right.
Well, on the flip side though, the MASH is obviously working, because you just said you're getting things through the MASH, and that's its intended job to do, is to do that. So that is one of the ways I would suspect that it's helping in that respect, because it's where you're highlighting things and you're dealing with them, rather than them being kept under the radar and no one knowing it's going on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a significant investment in the MASH, that as you're probably aware. I mean, some of the other work, as a partnership, if we're going to talk about kind of our partnership, some of the other work that we've been doing in relation to violence is quite wide and varied. So, as an example, the sexting type of incidents that happen, we've commissioned Loudmouth Productions to do some work within schools. So they'll be going in there, they'll be talking about those kind of things, CSE, alcohol, drugs, and those kind of things, and trying to empower, like younger people to take, I guess, sensible decisions in life and be aware of where they can go if they are experiencing, detrimental things in their life. So, that's one example. Other examples around violent crime. And again, we've got limited resources. We are quite fortunate. We get probably the biggest Police and Crime Commissioner grant across the county. It's around 80,000 that we get each year. A significant amount of that, I'd say a quarter of that, goes towards our tax marshals within the town centre. So if you looked at town centre violent crime, particularly around Nuneaton Street, which is where the hotspot was, that's significantly reduced. The antisocial behaviour in that area has reduced. The tax marshals are there, visible, at the right times of the day, on the right days, to kind of get people in the town and out of the town. And that's a partnership initiative. It's not just down to please do the policing side of things, but again, we've got a role, and it's something that as a council we've supported and want to continue to do. There's other things around, we do Alcohol Week information. I don't know if you're familiar with some of the activities that we've done. Again, I know Lynn's been involved in our planning you've been one of the staunch supporters, haven't you? Out in the community. There's other things around integrated offender management, where you look at the highest kind of prolific offenders and you manage where they are. There's MAPA, so multi-agency public protection arrangements that are in place around the most kind of prolific offenders for violence. The same with domestic abuse, there's the MARAP. So there's all these kinds of interventions that are done as partners to try to empower people, to protect people, to enforce. So, you talked about resources and police resources. There's changes in the police structure and because of the HMIC inspection and the recording codes. But, we're doing the best that we can with what we've got. And I think, so the figures don't look brilliant, but I don't feel, and I think the Chief Constable made it clear in his report, that it doesn't feel as though all of a sudden there's kind of lots of violent crime happening. I don't know if you kind of Dav's only started last week. It's like baptism of fire. But it wasn't something that Neil Harrison, I think when Neil reported to he wasn't saying, definitely we were super, super violent. It reflects changes that are being experienced everywhere.
I think what I probably would say though is, yes, I have just that this I probably don't have the level of detail yet, but my previous role was covering the Warwick and Stratford district, and coming from there, actually your burglary and ASB figures, the end of quarter four, the end of quarter four figures, have bucked the county trend really, and certainly across South Warwickshire, we saw fairly significant increases in both of those categories. So it's probably also worth saying a couple of things. Firstly, in terms of the crime recording, we don't want to sit here for meeting after meeting after meeting saying crime recording. At some point we have to try and get below what the impact of the crime recording is and see what the reality is. So we still need, because there will still be increases. And vehicle crime, I would suggest, is probably a category that is least susceptible to recording changes. And so the increases we've seen in vehicle crime is probably a very much a real-term increase. So it's hard to work from a baseline when it's constantly moving. But just to put some kind of perspective around where we might go this year is we've made significant improvements in our recording practices for crime, hence you can see in the overall category. However, when the Home Office inspected us recently, we are still not meeting their high standards. They require each force to meet a 95% compliance rate with conversion of reports into crimes, and we're still not there. So from that, I can only assume the trend will still be upwards for a period yet.
Keith, sorry.
Yeah, a few points. This has come before when we talked about the domestic violence. Each of these 478 is obviously a report. So some of them actually are the same household being reported again and again. And so it's useful to see if we're actually ever solving those problems, or sort of the low-hanging fruit of the few in that there are actually 10 or 20 calls, because obviously there'll be a large number of ones and a few twos. But it'd be useful to actually have a number of households or a graph or just something to give us an idea of how many are repeat and persistent. Because this is the sort of thing that a lot of the interventions should be starting to say, that needs an intervention and a turnaround. Second point I wanted to make is you talked about higher burglaries in Stratford and places. We've got far little valuable stuff, so people are coming out of the cities to burgle places. There's a lot of areas of very poor pickings, but one area anecdotally there's been a lot more burglaries is on the new housing estates, because obviously new housing, people got new tellies, so I don't know if that's been picked up at all. And finally, I always get annoyed that, I know it's a very tiny thing compared to having your BMW or your Audi stolen, but to a lot of people having the bicycle that gets stolen, that they go to work on stolen, is important. And then there never seem to be in any of these charts about 200 or 300 bicycles stolen a year in the borough, and they're just the reported ones. So it's always important to at least have a look at that.
Okay, so in terms of the domestic abuse cases and repeats, they're looked at in two places. One, the violence against women and girls board oversees all domestic abuse kind of interventions and commissioning, etc. And the other, I believe, is within the Marrock kind of arrangements that, again, like they're similar to MAPA, like public protection, and they gauge the vulnerability of the victim and they monitor that. I can ask for some information. From a NABSCOT perspective, it's not something that we monitor. We monitor the priorities that we've agreed and they've been agreed within this meeting, but I can ask if there is any information that can support your request there. Other question about domestic burglary increase in new housing estates. Are you talking in terms of Weddington and
Weddington, St Nick's, where new developments go on, there tends to be a little rash of burglaries anecdotally. I don't know if that's backed up by the stats, but there seem to be people who go into areas of new housing.
So if you look at, I appreciate you might have some more up-to-date information. If you look at the quarter that we're looking at, for St Nicholas, you've got actually a reduction in burglaries. There are 8, and 3 in Whitestone, which potentially, you've got Heath, it's Attleborough a little bit higher. I don't know, but we could, unless you're aware of anything.
That would be a piece of work to look at if you wanted to.
I'll tell you what I could do. I can ask PAG. We have something called Priority Action Group. I can ask them to have a look at burglary hotspots, and then mirror if they are happening within new housing developments. Because if they are, again, something else that NABSCOT does do is they provide target hardening packs. They're basically property, how to protect your property property, how to reduce your risk of being a victim of crime or a victim of burglary. So if it is showing a particular issue in those areas, we can certainly have a look at it. So I'll ask Linda to pick that up within PAG. And then your final point on the bikes. Bikes won't appear on here as an individual category because they haven't been agreed as a priority. And the reason why they haven't been agreed as a priority is because when we look at the strategic assessment and you look at the evidence, there isn't the evidence to say it needs to be a higher priority. And again, this panel has had an input into that. So unfortunately, NABSCOP can only look at the priorities that have been agreed within that process. Not to say if there's a significant issue, we won't look at it, but as of this report or what we're looking at, it doesn't appear in it for that reason.
Probably just worth adding to that though, that's from this meeting scrutiny and partnership perspective. That doesn't mean we just ignore cycle theft in the police. So.
Caroline and then Neil.
Thank you, Chair.
I just want to check something you said about domestic violence and historic child abuse. I don't know if I misunderstood you, but did you say they were classed in the same category? Did they say the sexual offences or the offences with injury?
In terms of domestic abuse?
Well, no, the violence against the person, or sexual, is it the sexual offence, the top row?
Okay, so
Did you say that includes current domestic violence and historic child abuse?
Well, the overall category is lumping the assault categories in with sexual offences. When you split that down below that, yes, you would have all categories of assaults, including any circumstance or scenario that they've occurred in, would be within that. So whether that's child abuse or domestic abuse or nighttime economy violence, they will all be recorded within that category.
I'm not sure if that's helpful then to... It's not helpful to me anyway, understanding different.
What would help you? What would you prefer to say?
I prefer not to have things lumped together. So I've got a clear picture of, okay, this is the current domestic violence problem.
Yeah.
This is the historic sexual abuse problem and so on.
Right, okay. So a little bit more of an understanding of what sits behind this.
Yeah.
Okay, we can do that.
It would be useful to take away the historic, and so you've got two clear views of what is going on recently and what has gone on historically.
And I've got our observatory analysts looking at that already. If you could make a note, Shirley, I can find out what I can try and find out what you no.
Neil?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I can understand all the changing of reporting. However, the fact still remains that with extra reporting, we've either, at what point do we sort of say, oh, isn't it great that everyone's reporting more crime, be it whatever offence, but these figures are horrendous. At what point does it say, well, we have got more reporting, however, this is really bad? You know, it's sort of like saying, well, we've got more reporting, this is... But, and without doubt, you know, even with the extra reporting, there are still a lot of people that don't report. You know, and like you say, because of the changes in reporting and the trend you expect the trend to go up. My question is, what the hell are we going to do about it? Because society out there, it's worse than what it has been before. Now, or if it isn't worse than what it has been before, why are we getting so many reports? You know, so we can't have it, I don't think we can have it both ways. You know, and I'd just like to know, at this present moment in time, with great respect to you, Keith, as well, about burglaries in Weddington. I mean, domestic burglary has gone up 26s against 6, burglary of it 11 against 7 in my ward. Total offences have gone up from 215 to 308. Every ward, 21 out of 22 wards have suffered an increase through extra reporting, or are things really that bad? Now, to me, things are really that bad because we've had the extra reporting and it's shown that things are worse out there. Now, I don't know if society's changing or it's always been the same, so that there is an argument that these things have always happened, but they haven't been reported, and maybe people have said, well, we know it's worse, but you know, that's human beings for you. You know, so at what point do we sort of say, what the hell are we going to do now? And with that, you know, I'd like to make a recommendation to the committee that we give the PCC a copy of this report, right, and ask that he appears before us and explain what action he proposes to do, and we've got plans he's got in place to actually address these figures. I don't know what the comparative figures are in Warwick, Stratford for domestic violence, rape, things like that, you know, but these figures are awful. I'm pleased there's people reporting them, but there is a problem.
Just on one of your points, the PCC is already scheduled to come in.
Good.
So we were on that
Yeah.
anyway.
Next meeting, hopefully.
We'll
I can't remember if it's September or November.
Yeah, as soon as
But it
possible,
is
please.
scheduled.
It's in his diary.
Good.
Okay,
Sorry.
I'll
Big
take your
job.
points one by one, Councillor. In terms of the figures, we do, from a partnership perspective, we haven't been complacent over the fact that they have increased. In 2015-16, we escalated it, and we asked for a briefing note, and we asked for an explanation as to why they were increasing. That was brought to this board. In 2016-17, again, NABSCOT had said they weren't happy with the figures. They didn't want to. We're not complacent about them at all, but we have to work within the parameters of what the Chief Constable's saying. So if the Chief is saying this is our rationale, and the PCC, who is present in these meetings, is aware of that, we have to accept that. It doesn't mean that we go away and go, right, we're not doing anything, because we quite clearly are doing a lot to take it forward. So that's the one on the figures. The other thing about comparisons to other districts and boroughs, I can provide that. I can send you all a copy of the county-wide performance, so you can see what the comparisons are to the other community safety areas.
Yeah.
The third thing about Abbey, your ward, we are trying to do an awful lot to improve Abbey. We've got a multi-agency, kind of multi-community faceted meeting that we have on a regular basis to your views and your feelings are representative of your ward, and we have your constituents saying the same things to us, what's happening in Abbey. We're not happy. So we've been working with representatives from there for probably about 3 or 4 months on a regular basis, listening to them. We've had the Inspector Russ coming along to those meetings, taking away actions and the like. So we're not ignoring that. We know that that's an issue. We've had a particular focus on Meadow Court. We're pursuing a closure order for the Abbey ward. So we collectively understand where you're coming from, because we're concerned about it too, and we're doing what we can, very best we can with what we've got to try and make that area safer.
Can I just ask?
Yeah.
Are you getting intelligence from the communities about things that are going on in the communities that are being perpetrated by people within that community? Is there a good feedback from the community? Because we can't do it without people chipping in.
Yeah.
You know, I don't go out and commit crimes. I'm sure nobody in the room goes out and commit crimes, but people do. And it's those people that have got to stop committing crimes, as well as we've got to catch them. So what's being done within the communities to help feed through the information to the people that can go out and catch them? I know in my ward we've got a really good community information sharing network, and it goes straight back to the SNTs. We work really well. as a community, but is that going on in other areas?
Yeah.
Yes,
Very
it
much
does.
so, yeah, very much so.
It does, but the other thing to bear in mind is that some of these areas are some really horrible people
Oh, yeah,
who
yeah.
scare the people.
Yeah.
So yes, there is good information exchange, but some people are reluctant to do it for very obvious reasons. So yes, we do. I mean, the community that we meet with are all very happy to share information.
Yeah.
But I'll be naive of me to say that we get it off everybody, because people are genuinely scared. I mean, we briefly last week, Daph and I met and we talked about Abbey. You know, we talked about, I think you've possibly, both ward members from Abbey have had an email from my team asking, what do you know in your area?
Yeah.
Because what we're keen on doing is understanding more about individuals, you know, victims, perpetrators, you name it, so we can gather a kind of a broader understanding of it. So I take your concerns, we're not ignoring them because we've got the same ones,
Chair,
they're on our radar.
It would be, it's the first time I've sat on this committee for a long time, so it's good to have things brought up today,
Yeah.
but the figures are awful.
Just adding from a police perspective then that the flow of information is there from the community,
Yeah.
but could always be better,
Yeah.
could always be improved. There are 4 drugs warrants executed across the Abbey ward over the last few months, and we don't do warrants without the information coming to us in the first place, so there must be a degree of confidence there. Of course, that would always be improved. The resource we had to put in to the post-terror attacks, in terms of visibility, reassurance, etc., that had to be our focus over that period. However, now that we're moving back towards a little bit more business as usual in terms of that aspect, then Abbey ward remains a focus. You can't ignore the figures, and we've never looked to ignore figures. It's probably also worth just quickly saying that when I come, when anybody comes to the meetings and reiterates the Chief Constable's reasonings behind increases of crime, that's to put things in perspective. That's not to suggest we sit here and go, there's some more increases. We look at every crime category, trends, hotspots, partnership data, and we target where we can and what we can. But Abbey ward is clearly recognised as requiring additional attention.
Thank you.
On the MASH side of it, multi-agency, do you use the superstores like Tesco for Bedworth, for instance, Asda for Nuneaton? Because I know that I've been to you before about Asda having to close early on certain nights because they don't like the crime because of it and things like that. So do you go out to integrate these superstores, or
I mean, we've liaised with. Are you asking in
or
terms
can we
of
not?
MASH?
Can we not? Yeah, well, yeah, sort of. Or can we not sort of put their managers, store managers, on some sort of group to come in to see us, so they can
Great one.
so they can come in and see us and tell us what sort.
You councillor, bring me in.
I'll just do well. But no, I think because I think it was Thursday night, weren't it? They was having loads of crime, and then that linked into crime in town when there was only one Bobby on, if you remember, and then it come to the taxi marshals. So that.
Okay.
But all of that information came from Asda for me.
Okay. So in terms of superstores, and if we take Tesco in Bedworth as an example, Tesco has featured lots of times within our partnership discussions. We've had complaints from the public. We've had meetings with the Tesco superstore. I think at one point there might have been a dispersal put into place to kind of stop people hanging around there. So if you're asking, do we move and recognise it? Yes. Another area within the town, within Nuneaton, has been McDonald's, and we've done a lot of work around McDonald's. My team have gone and liaised with the manager of McDonald's, and I think we might have said we were going to use some of our ASB tools and powers if they didn't do something, and they did. So yes, we do stuff. If you're asking in relation to the MASH tends to kind of sit alone. It's like a multi-agency hub, and they look at the most vulnerable people children and adults.
Yeah, what I'm on about is using them for information sharing, because like I say, we didn't know until they got hold of me and told me that they was closing early on a Thursday and Sunday and things like that because of people going in there causing trouble.
Right, okay.
So that then drives the crime somewhere else, as it into town.
Yeah.
So I just think it's worth perhaps trying to involve some of the superstores around.
Okay.
I've
So
got a few
improve
other,
liaison.
I've got a few other things.
You see, I was going to say some of the issue about that you're raising about kind of big stores in the town that probably open a bit later than others will also feature in what Jonathan White is looking at in terms of town centre kind of plans, and he wants to create a clean and green and kind of a vibrant city town centre. So some of that will hopefully also be picked up within that forum as well. And he will be looking at it because people won't come into town if they're scared of young people hanging around. So he's also he's looking at, the other thing he's looking at, that I think Councillor Shepherd had raised, was people hanging around the town and begging, or the perception that they're begging, and homelessness and stuff.
Okay, the other thing is on page 1, in the white box in the middle, is alcohol and drugs marker.
Yeah.
I mean, that's gone down 5% according to this from last year. But I'd like to see an alcohol and drugs. Or alcohol and drugs.
What you'd like to see them take
Separate.
Separate.
Because our addiction places, they're being caught, getting taken out of town, things like that. All of these things that get taken out of town, taken somewhere else, has an effect on the crime. And if we don't know which crime it is, if we don't know if it's the difference between drugs or alcohol or whatever, we don't know where to go.
So are you saying for all crime? Are you saying for all crimes to look at the percentage that are associated with alcohol and the percentage that are associated with drugs?
Well, I think so, yeah.
Those as well, don't
Okay, because sometimes my memory might fail me, but I think we sometimes get that information when we get our strategic assessment to say there's this proportion of this and that proportion of that. A, let me check that, and B, let me see how feasible it is to provide it.
Okay, because at about 2 meetings on the trot now, I've asked for drug driving,
Yeah.
and I was promised I was going to get that. Still not had that. So if we could have the drugs driving stats, I'd appreciate that.
From road safety.
Because I forget which one it was now, because you come and go so often. It was a woman, wasn't it?
I don't think I wasn't here.
Yeah. Well, I can't remember her name.
Maybe Glasgow.
Oh yeah. She says there's been a significant amount of people stopped for drug driving.
Right, okay.
And she was going to supply that, but never has. But I would be interested to see the amount of people that are scared to stop for drug driving now.
Okay. Is that something you're able to...
I mean, that information should be available, so I'll take that away.
All right, thank you. I just one last one, and then I'm done, honestly. Over the page on the cross-cutting themes, you've got 8 offences, criminal incidents, and you've got cybercrime below it. So could some of them 8 offences be linked to cybercrime?
They could be.
Because also there's a lot of cyberbullying going on, isn't there? Facebook bullying.
Well, I would
whatever.
probably suggest, it's only my opinion, what I would probably suggest in the cyber category is these cross-cutting themes, some of them, particularly the cybercrime work, is reliant on when a crime report is raised within the police, the officer recording the crime, adding a cybercrime marker to it. So, as you say, it could be harassment, it could be online harassment, so then the officer would need to add a cybercrime marker to it. And as you can see from the asterisks at the bottom, that's how the observatory searches this data.
Right.
So I would probably suggest that is a vastly under-recorded category, because it's very reliant on officers deciding to put a tag or an interest marker on it.
Right, okay.
But you're right, they can be duplicated. So you could have a hate crime that's also a cyber crime.
Right.
So there's also a violence without injury crime. So yeah.
And do we sort of rely on Facebook policing their own sort of?
Facebook,
Yeah.
not just Facebook, but the social media giants are exceptionally difficult to deal with. They tend to be based in America or certainly outside of this country.
Yeah.
Any contact is, even with us, is online only, and the response you get isn't what you would hope for.
So you would expect somebody that was feeling that sort of crime to report it to the police?
Yeah, and I think that's probably why a lot of the things, there's probably two reasons. One, people use it more, and the more people use it, the more this ridiculous abuse cycles around.
Yeah.
But if you go to Facebook or Snapchat or anywhere else and try and get some kind of resolution through that, you probably won't get anywhere.
Right, okay. That's it. Thank you.
Councillor Blythe.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's, if you look at the record for the beat areas, I actually live in Bedworth East, which has got red across the board, and represent Poplar, which has got 3 reds and 1. So it looks like I live and represent practically the worst areas of the borough. Now, what I'm concerned about is everything, these cost-cutting themes, etc., being lumped all together, and we don't seem to, if there's a hotspot, the hotspot should be able to be identified. There's once upon a time, at the area forums, the area committees, if the local community that was there wanted 2 police things to go forward to the next forum so they get sorted out, all that's gone now. We can't tell them. So when you say we're trying to involve the public and local representatives, there is no comeback from those representatives saying, right, we've got this particular problem, and we'll have it dumped in here, hate offence. So I would argue things like hate offences and etc. Is that since Brexit? Is it a big step up from there? And if so, there's a particular problem.
Yeah.
And if we should be looking at that at the phenomenon at your level, to turn around and say, well, here's the categories, and this category's been ticked a lot more times than that. I might not show in these statistics because they're all, as we said before, lumped together. But there's somewhere along the line we've got to be able to, as partnerships, turn around and say something, right, there's a perceived or even a perceived problem, which could even be worse. If people actually think the perception of crime has gone up, that sometimes is even worse than the actual figures that could be produced. And if it's something to do with the cuts and the further cuts that's coming forward, we should be daft enough or big enough to turn around and say that that's a particular problem that we've got. But don't give people false hopes. In fact, according to these figures, I'm concerned, like Councillor Phillips was saying, about there seems to be an increase, and there doesn't seem to be an answer in order how to deal with that increase. And I'm thinking again, perhaps the model that we're using at this present moment is flawed, and we should have a real look at that model. Because if the police commissioner comes along and he sees, I presume he's going to get a copy of the particular things we've raised today, so he's going to be forearmed or forewarned that some of these questions could be asked, and therefore he possibly have the answers for us. But I'm just concerned that we say community involvement, but it seems to me as though although the involvement is there is no action in order to take up those particular concerns. And that's a big concern. If there's hotspots, we should try and deal with them rather than just saying it is what it is. If it is what it is, we should change that perception.
Okay. Just in response to that, in terms of hotspots, what you've got here is a high level kind of overview of information. We have underneath the NABSCOP structure, there are several delivery groups. One of them is Priority Action Group. What that gets is updates of the hotspot areas here. So what you won't get on here is where are these, so for example, where are the burglaries happening? We can't bring you that information here because it's not in the public domain, but it is looked at and it's looked at because what we do is intelligence led. How we've got limited resources. How we deploy them, we have to put them in the area of greatest need. So we do that. An example again is the work that we're doing in Abbey. Another example is we've got 17 CCTV cameras that are sent across the borough, and they're based on risk, harm, where the issues are, etc. They're deployed every 4 weeks or more frequently if there's a need. In terms of community involvement, there's obviously Bedworth Neighbourhood Watch that are active. We've got Neighbourhood Watch within Nuneaton and Bedworth that covers a different Neighbourhood Watch that covers Nuneaton and Bedworth. You know, we've got great links with them. They're involved in the work that we do. So when they're coming to us and saying, well, you know, this is an issue in this area, what are you doing about it? We work with them to kind of make improvements there. You talked about hate crime and what we're doing about hate crime. We're doing loads on hate crime. So again, this document doesn't tell you what we're doing. So to give you an overview, and I'll start from the county level. There's a county hate crime kind of group that has liaised with agencies across the county to come up with an action plan. The action plan is then translated into communication, intervention, support for communities. And what that means, within Nuneaton and Bedworth, well, actually across the northern area, we've set something up called the Hate Information Partnership that my lovely assistant to the right chairs and has picked up. That looks at incidents, it looks at trends, it looks at emerging themes, etc. So that's one side of it. Within Nuneaton and Bedworth, we've had quite a few big events. We had We Stand Together. I don't know if many of you were aware of that, but we had something called We Stand Together, which again was bringing loads of communities together from different areas to talk about what people wanted to see addressed within hate crime. What do we as agencies need to do to respond to hate crime? How do we encourage and reassure people to report it? So that's another piece. And then linked to that, we also do something around prevent work. So the counter-terrorism strategy is split into several different sections. One of them is called Preventive Violent Extremism. As a council, we've got a statutory duty to embed that within what we're doing. Some of you might have had training, some of you might be booked onto training, some of you might never have heard of the training, but if you want it, it's there. Every person, every employee within our council has to go, if they're frontline, has to go on prevent training. And linked to that, where we've had issues, so we had the Manchester attack, and we obviously had the arrest within Nuneaton. In less than a couple of hours, we had a meeting with the key community concerns to speak to them about what was going on in their area and to reassure them and to try and reduce incidents of hate crime that we kind of were anticipating. So on hate crime, there's loads of stuff that's happening. But you just don't, this just doesn't tell you that. So I just want to reassure you. And the other thing you mentioned, sorry, the last point is the Police and Crime Commissioner. He is a member of NABSCOP. So he does see these figures. He's also a member of the Safe Warwickshire Partnership Board. And he's the one, as I said to you earlier, we apply for a grant every year from him. He's the one that provides that grant. And we get the most across the whole of the county. Proportionately, we get the highest amount of grant from him than any other district. So he does listen.
Chair, look, just very quickly come back. I'm assuming because we get the most, because most of the crime is committed in the north, and so I wouldn't say it's very generous of them to do this. It's because the facts and figures show that this is the problem area. And I'm pleased, you see, the thing is, if you've got information in front of you, you should try and use that information to the best of your ability. And what you're saying is that this information is broken down at different levels in order to deal with particular problems. If that's where once upon a time there used to be arguments about silos and people working in each individual silo. You have these silos that are getting together and getting the information down here, but it's got to be disseminated somehow. And if there's a particular problem with that particular thing, we should be able to connect it. We don't need to have the details here. all we are saying is that the perceived things that are happening, we can see the statistics here, they're going up. And the questions that we're asking is why are they going up? And what's being done in order. We don't have to go to the phenomenological level and know every single little bit of every particular ward, but we need something in front of us to say that what particular problems have been notified that could be dealt with. And the more community involvement, as far as I'm concerned, the better. Thank you.
One last one, and then we do need to move on.
Thank you, Chair. The sexual offences and rape figures, are they figures solely for adults or are children included?
No, children included, nurseries.
And the reporting for children, is that going up as well?
Yes. Although I don't have a breakdown of the percentage breakdown between children and adults. Yes, the overall category across all age groups is increasing.
Would you consider that to be, if it was a historic child abuse case, would you count that against a child or an adult?
Be counted against a child,
Right.
but even though it's historic, it would be counted against this year's figures.
As a child?
As a child.
This year, right, okay. Because you did say that historic child abuse and historic sexual offences are on the increase to be. Right, okay.
Chair, if I could help you for just for a brief second. You were mentioning taxi marshals earlier on. There's a growing number of people actually getting Uber taxis within this authority, and they don't come under this scheme, do they? And are we looking at, because our taxi drivers have got to be licensed and various other things, etc., etc. Is anybody looking at Uber and what they're doing up around the borough? So some simple.
I don't know in terms of licensing, taxi licensing, what the process is in terms of considering that. But the taxi marshals are deployed to the rank in town, so it's not linked to the licensing element of it. It's linked to the location of where the temporary rank is. But I can check with Carl Jacobs to see if he's got Uber on his radar.
So this is one to understand this report.
Okay.
This is just coming back on something that you said earlier. Can you on the bits that are got an asterisk by, you've got the three at the top, the crime and social behaviour, violence against person and sexual offences, that's got an asterisk. Then under that got violence against person, injury, violence against person without injury. Can you tell me what the asterisk stands?
Then the asterisk is explained. So right, I'm with you.
So
where it says VAP,
yeah.
no, it's explained. So if you go to that white box underneath in the middle, it says of Q4 2016-17 VAP with injury offences in the equator at the bottom. It's just drawing attention to that they're linked to that point with the asterisk.
Right, moving on. Next one is the integrated conformance report. And the
Okay, I'm just about to start. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's my bit done. Right, nice to meet you all, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, before you go, can I just say that we've been doing a lot, there's been a lot going on in my area, and the Safe Neighbourhoods team have been absolutely brilliant. So, big thank you to them.
Your area, and I should pass it back.
It's Arbray.
Thank you, it's nice to have some positive
Yeah, they've
feedback.
been really good, I have to say.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so the next report is on integrated performance, and it's again the same period of time that we're looking at, so up until the end of 2016-17. So the report covers a broad area of performance, and I believe that it provides an overview of every element of responsibility that this panel looks at. For your purposes, it's split into three parts, and you'll see that Appendix A has got the performance results that are available at the end of the year for 2016-17. It also includes a strategic risk register, and then finally the strategic performance is also provided. My understanding is that when these reports are provided, exception reported in terms of the areas that aren't performing well are highlighted, is that right? Okay, so I'll give you an explanation in terms of that in a minute. The other thing to note within the report, and again I'm not familiar with this, but I've kind of picked it up from reading it, the regulation, the RIPA stuff, highlighted that an inspection report asked for information to come to this panel around covert surveillance? Yeah. So consequently, elected members should be made aware that as of the end of the quarter, there has been no surveillance operations. So that should kind of reassure you that we haven't done any. So in terms of what you're being asked to do, you're asked to scrutinise the performance that's within it, make any recommendations to the relevant cabinet portfolio holder, and we've got two areas, well actually I've got three areas to update you. Well, Shirley said it was 2 minutes, actually 3. Okay, and Rob, I've got another assistant to my right, Rob Watson, who is going to pick up 2 of them. Actually, there's 4. There's 4 points. So the first point is on page 26, which is around community recreation. And it's at the top of the page. So, I mean, all I can update you on there is that the reason for the end of year outturn being over what it should have been is that it's due to expected protected income and pension related costs. So I think that's where somebody's obviously come into a post from a higher grade and has got X amount of I think it used to be 2 years, it's a year now, which is why that's increased there.
Is that the 131,000?
Yes.
That's quite a lot.
That's got to be a lot.
Wow.
Chair, I think it's going to be very, with the greatest respect to Rachel, and I do mean this, this is very, very difficult for Rachel to present and answer questions when a director should be here, who is responsible for these areas.
We did try and get somebody in for that, if you wouldn't
I
mind
was
filling
going to,
everyone in, Shirley.
I have, that was the one I missed earlier, but I have since then tried to get hold of somebody that would be able to update us on that. But unfortunately, by the time I got to them, they'd just gone into informal cabinet. So I couldn't get them to tell me what that actually meant. So, but we will get that information to you.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, we will.
so just to confirm, I'm here, Dawn Dawson's on leave, so I'm here on behalf of my director. Okay, and then the next item to draw to your attention is on page 29, which I believe is in relation to the HRA, housing standards? No, that's wrong, I'm on the wrong page. Private sector housing standards, so Rob, that's you.
You mentioned that there were 4 items and 2
There's
of them
2 for you.
2 were for me, right?
Yeah.
And there was 1. But here we go. Obviously, I'm just picking up the private sector dwellings returned into occupation, so effectively the empty properties. Previous year we'd done 30, and in 16-17 that had dropped down to 12. Just to put that into a bit of context, over the past 4 years the figures have been 7, 14, 30 last year, and then 12. So we did have a particularly good year last year. In the final quarter figures were actually exactly the same as the previous year. But moving forward into quarter 1 of this year, we're already ahead of where we need to be for this year's figures. So obviously with empty properties, it's governed by complaints when we're a reactive service on that side of it. Proactively, we targeted the properties where owners have been susceptible or willing to take the grant, and we're left with the properties now, the longer term empty properties that are more problematic and a bit more difficult to engage with the owners. So that's probably an explanation of why the figures are where they are.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask you, it looks like we've spent £193,000 helping private sector dwellings be returned to occupation. And we've done that on 12 properties, so that's over £16,000 per property.
Well, the maximum loan we can give is actually 10,000, so that the figure that's written there, we can only give a grant of up to £10,000 per property.
Okay, so the outturn at the end was you spent 193,000 on it, and 12 properties have been brought back into
that might be to
occupation.
actually to fund the empty property officer who's currently vacant at the moment.
Right. Typically, can you just very quickly explain to us why we as the local authority would be giving a lot of money to private sector property owners to bring it back into the
I mean,
occupation?
empty properties are a national problem, and not just a problem within Nuneaton and Bedworth. And there's a drive from central government to increase in bring empty properties back into use. There's a whole myriad of reasons why some properties are empty.
But sorry, to be specific, why do we give them money to do that? How much do we give them? What's the money for?
Okay. The money is actually to enable the property to be brought back into use, to actually do up derelict properties. Okay. So rather than being an eyesore on the community, it's a loan, so we'll get that money back over a period of 5 years.
Then how does it cost us anything? Because clearly we've got a rolling period of...
Because until the 5-year grant repayment period is actually cleared, it still counts as a deficit. So it's not recycled back to spend again until the whole £10,000 is paid off, because it's paid back on a monthly basis.
How long have we been doing this for? Is this the first year then, or what?
No, we've been doing it since 2013.
Right, so obviously we're coming up to the point where 5 years will be coming through. Okay.
So is this a rolling figure then, would you say?
Which figure?
That's in here, the 193,000. Would that be a roll on?
Well, obviously, over so many years, it's a rolling on figure, yes, but it's not an annual figure.
Yeah, okay.
We allocate 150,000 an annual basis to spend on anti-corruption grants, but we don't always achieve 15 grants in a particular year.
Okay, that just clears it up a little bit more.
Yeah, you said earlier that you're doing good enough almost this quarter, but actually there's no sort of doing good enough. It's sort of one of these things, the more we can do, the better. I understand we actually did get some new homes bonus benefit from getting empty homes back into use. So as a council, not only do we get housing benefits, council tax benefits, reduced crime benefits, it's actually the government was giving us some money to do this stuff in the past.
4,000 per property.
4,000 per property. And we also generate, when we got 30 houses back into use, we probably built 300 new houses. So it's actually providing 10% of our new housing capacity was actually coming from getting the derelicts back into use. Is that right?
Well, it's the derelict properties that returned back into use through this scheme are privately owned, and they can choose to rent the property to whoever they wish. The problem with a lot of authorities is when they're doing this schemes, they try and put too many conditions in place, and so they may choose to rent it to people on local housing allowance, for example, and that actually transpires that they can't actually give the money away, believe it or not. So that's why we was conditioned with no conditions.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah, I mean, clearly we're all aware there's a desperate need for us to get accommodation for people to live in, whether it be private sector housing or council houses or the other sectors. There's a desperate need for it, and nothing makes me more angry than when I see properties lying empty, and not always derelict properties. I'll give you an example. On the old Labour Club site in Bedworth in Chapel Street, there's a partly developed site there. They built all the flats on the corner. They're all fully fitted. Well, they were fully fitted out when they were built until trespassers got in there, ripped all the copper and the boilers and everything out. And then they were refitted again. Yet whoever owns the site just leaves them empty. They've been empty now for, it must be 10 years.
I believe that was subject to a bankruptcy, wasn't it?
Yes, but there's other owners involved in it.
Right.
And even if it was a bankruptcy, there must be something to do with a liquidator that could do something. And I think if there's nothing in place now, and this is probably something that would need to be passed on to the government, local authorities should be given the funding and the opportunity to be able to seize such properties and land. A bit like the compulsory purchase orders. I know people don't want to go down that route because it's so legally, whatever. But seize those properties that are lying empty, because there's no excuse for it when you've got brand new properties and they're just lying there doing nothing. It's a crying shame. We've got people living on the streets that need somewhere to live. And in regard to the derelict side of properties and that, I'm aware because the Residents Association in my area down in Collycroft, although I wasn't there because it was the night of another meeting, their recent meeting has raised issues about 2 properties in one particular road in Collycroft that are being left lying and gradually falling apart. They're still owned by local people, and you know we should be able to get in there. I mean, at some point I will be, because they've asked me by email about it. I said, you know, it will be our private sector housing officer. We've got them in place too. But as I say, the ones in Chapel Street, well, it's beyond words for me because for the desperate need we've got, and just for them to be sitting empty. So why can't we seize them?
Can I just respond to that? We do have powers as a local authority in place to, like you say, compulsory purchase properties. But when you're following that process, one of the things that they want to see to enable you to do that is the fact that you've tried to engage with the owner and offered them the grants. So periodically we write to all the owners of empty properties when a property's been empty for 12 months. We'll write to them, and then once it gets to 18 months, we'll then start to step up the enforcement approach. So some of these properties have actually been returned to use as a direct result of enforcement. It isn't always about the grant, but a grant is a key part of engaging with the owner to try and get them on side initially, because the enforcement side of it is a last resort, but it is a step that we will take if we need to.
Yeah, but Chair, because they were newly constructed properties, and I've checked, they're not shown on the electoral register, you know, because it's like they're not there. And if we can take, I mean, I don't know whether the owners or the liquidators have been contacted on those particular ones, but I would ask the officer to go away and do that if it hasn't, because even that stage of it's a bit like compulsory purchase orders. Sometimes you've got to take that initial action, and then once the owners of the sites think, oh, hang on a minute, I'm not going to make so much off this if they could CPO it, suddenly something happens. And I would urge the officers to go down that route with those properties in Chapel Street. And I'm sorry being parochial, but it is quite an unusual case. And I would ask, if they need to, get in touch with me, and I'll take them down there, show them, and we can talk about how we can do that.
Could you check first? This has been brought up in the past committees. Could you check whether any representation has already been made to the owner?
Sure.
We might find that they already have actually been attempted to contact, because I know we've discussed them particular flats before. And if not, can you take it forward and make contact and see what we can do about it?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of compulsory purchase orders, it's whether we've got the resources to buy it in the first place, because we'd have to have that money in place to
Absolutely.
It's an investment though, isn't it?
We could refer it through to NABSEL if that's the case. We could actually push that through that arm of the council to see if we can actually generate a sale that way.
I'll have a look at that and
find it out
and come back to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Can you report back to us on that as well, please, so we know that? Thank you very much. Sorry for really
just finish off on that.
Yeah, sorry.
Because if they are, until they are completed and they've got a complete certificate, they don't pay council tax, I believe. But when they are complete, we'll raise £18,000 or something similar for local government, both the county and the borough council and the fire and the police. So it's £18,000 or some, I don't know what the actual council tax is, but yeah, it's something like £18,000 of money that will go to local government if they're actually flats rather than unfinished flats.
Yeah, but we can take that forward then.
Certainly.
Chair.
Chris, sorry.
On your 30 odd houses, walk back into use, I think you've probably been a bit unfair on yourself really, because sometimes it takes a few years. You might want to explain to people, sometimes it takes years for them to be brought back into use, because we had one in Marlwood, for instance. It took 7 years to get all that owner to bring that house back into use. And there's also like, coming up on Bill's point is we've got a particular landlord in Nuneaton who's got, I think, somewhere like 800 properties, a lot of them are old pubs and things like that. You ain't going to get him to do anything. You don't matter if you threaten him with compulsory purchase, it's not going to do it. So, you know, you're on a difficult job here, but I have used the empty housing officer quite a few times within my ward, so I do know it just.
Yeah, and it's not, obviously we're engaging with owners that don't want to be engaged with a lot of the time, but ultimately if there's a community impact, whether that owner wants to engage with us or not, we have got the powers available to force the issue actually, so we can take over management of it if we chose to do that. The issue is we have got one part-time empty property officer, and we've only got so much resources, both financial and officer time, and the private sector team is small as it is. So it's trying to choose which case to take forward and which ones get closed, because there's a lot of empty properties out there.
So you're the manager now?
Sorry?
Are you the new manager?
Yes, I've been in post since April.
Oh right, okay.
This year.
No pressure.
Expect your mailbox to be full tomorrow, then I've got you very.
Poor Rob. Thanks, Claire. Yeah, well, I was going to mention the pubs actually that Chris has meant, because well, we've all got them near us, haven't we? And it's an absolute waste of land. And but we've also got bits of land. We've got a bit down Queen's Road on the corner with York Street, which I call the Somme, because it's been there for years. It's absolutely vile, and it's right on the main street. And then we've got another bit next to the club, 5 Street Club, another bit of unused pocket of land that could be used for housing, but they're just left to rot for how many years now? Well, decades probably they've been there, and they're just left to rot, and no one seems to take responsibility for them. Occasionally a fence comes down and somebody will put a new one up, and that's it, and they're just horrible eyesores, and people could be living there, and it's just really frustrating. So if you've got any powers, particularly for those 2 spots of land, to buy them and build on them.
If it's land banking that's the issue, where there's empty plots of land are just being held basically to increase in value over a period of 10, 15, 20 years, which is happening quite a lot. Obviously central government need to look at that as a broader issue and tackle that. That isn't something that local authority have got control over at the moment.
That's unfortunate, because it looks like we're going to be
But it's not just
stuck with
the
those
council
eyesores
tax, which you
forever.
mentioned. It's all about the community infrastructure levy as well, which will get given at the planning stage, so it'll contribute towards community infrastructure.
Sorry, just one more question. So you've got no right on empty shops and flats and bush shops or anything like that. You've got no right to.
If it's already an existing building, so an empty shop, an empty flat, yes, we have powers. And obviously there's a relaxation at the moment about conversion of shops and offices into residential, so there's an opportunity for us there. But what we have to do is engage with the owners and make them aware that the planning restrictions have been relaxed, because a lot of the time, to be honest, they may not even be aware. Maybe in a property that they'd inherited that they don't actually want any management of.
No,
but working with council, that's something that maybe we could look to develop. So we could do the property up using the grant or other assistance, and then actually we could look to use NABSEL to actually manage it going forward, so the owner doesn't have to do anything at all.
Well, the town centre's begging for something like that, isn't it?
But as Rachel mentioned earlier, Jonathan White is working with local landlords about converting some of the empty property.
He's doing quite well. And, getting to the number of problem, I think, in the town centre.
Okay, so the other one I was referring to is at the top of 29, which is about a budget query. it looks as though the budget for 16-17 was 149,000, but actually the end of year outturn was 193,000. I think the explanation that has been given there is about increased salary costs, so the difference is 44,000. Right. Yeah. I can't tell you any more than that, I'm afraid. If you want me to find out more, I can check and come back to you.
I think that was what
We've just been
the
talking
Trowman
about.
was speaking about earlier.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the last one, which is on page 30 at the bottom, I've got an update from Joe Robinson. So basically the target here in 2016-17 was 97.1% of rent collection to be completed. She's provided an update which isn't on your report but I can give you. So she's addressing this by splitting arrears into bands and then allocating specific resources to each case. So I'm assuming that means she'll band them and then allocate them to officers to pick up and deal with. The other item was that she's reviewing she's reviewing the system functionality to automate some of the processes. So I think she's kind of changing the process of the system to be able to be more responsive. And then the final point was that another reason for the slippage there was that a member of staff had been on maternity leave. They've now backfilled that post with an agency worker. So hopefully with those three things to put there, we'll get that back on track. Yeah. Is that okay?
Can I just ask, just so we put all this in context, how many council housing units are there in the borough?
Oh, there's a question. Just
6,000.
shy of 6,000. Just shy of 6,000.
Yeah.
Just shy of 5,000.
Just shy of 5,000.
4,000.
What about leaseholders?
Leaseholders is on top of that.
Yeah.
I thought it was 5,000.
About 4,000.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
You were told it was 6.5. I think 6.5 includes leaseholders.
That includes the leaseholders.
Yeah. As you can tell, we're all in Ireland, so I'll get you the exact figure and let you know.
If you're going to go to the trouble of doing that, it'd be very useful to know what other properties we put council tenants in, or effectively council tenants, if people off the waiting list, where we've got nomination rights over the tenant for social housing, that would be
signed. As well, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and also if there's agreements with social housing providers that we get to nominate the tenant, then it'd be good to know the total scope of the council.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so that.
Yeah. Cheers, bud. The only thing that's going to come to mind now is these figures are going to change anyway because of the relaxation of what was commonly known as rent-free weeks. One of the things the Resident Partnership is warning people is that there are no longer what they call free rent weeks. It's just your rent's been reduced to match that. And I do think you're going to have people that haven't left enough money in their banks to cover it, thinking they are going to get 3 weeks. So I think you're going to have change in these figures this year anyhow. And I think that is something we're going to have to be prepared for.
So on the rent-free weeks, the best thing we can do though is just keep on communicating to people.
Well, yeah, you communicated it, right, yeah. I mean, we've worked through our Facebook page and everything else, but, you know, whenever you speak to people, it's because, I mean, everybody had the new tenancy agreement. Within that was telling them that there's no longer free rent weeks. But it's still, if you're in a habit of saying, oh, I know I've got July, there's 2 weeks I haven't got to pay, and they haven't left enough funds in their bank, I think you're going to have problems with the rent collections anyhow.
Okay. I mean, from what I can gather, Joe's got that in hand, as in terms of recognising that that's going to be a potential issue anyway.
That's right, yeah.
Just on one, what are you going to do? You're going to ask for how many council houses we've got and how many leaseholds?
It was just to clarify the exact figure, because we think it's over 6,000, including leaseholders. So to clarify that, but the council chairman was asking in terms of other agents, in terms of other social landlords, what's the interaction between us and them? So we need to clarify that. Where do we refer? You're asking like where?
Yeah, we want to know the total reach of the council to house people.
Yeah.
Well, okay. On top of that, then, can we also find out how many houses or properties we let through the general fund? Because that won't come under your council houses. It's under the general fund. So we used to have 2 in Queen's Road, for instance.
Yeah.
They're now gone. We've got 1 in Valley Farm and that, and there's probably loads all over the
Yeah,
place.
no
But
problem.
that's
Okay.
in the general fund.
Yeah, no worries.
I think, Chair, we do work with social housing, and they're part of our home hunt system,
Yeah.
whereby we can have, they have a certain allocation that will be council, well, nominated by us to go into them. Now that will probably fluctuate depending on who's available to go into these places at any particular time on the waiting list. You know, but it would be interesting to know how many actual council tenants we have, not just properties.
So tenants, properties, leaseholders,
General fund.
general fund properties.
Everything.
Okay.
Yeah, we will understand the scope of the council to house people, because if you've got scope to house this many people and your waiting list's only that big, then that's not so bad. If your waiting list's this big and your scope to house them is not much bigger, then that's bad. So
That's what it is,
Yeah.
yeah. That's what it is. Yeah.
About 18
put it in
minutes.
simplistic terms.
Okay, no problem. So that kind of concludes that part of the report.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a couple of questions on things you haven't highlighted. One was the capital spending. You've got a smiley face on the capital spending being under budget, underspent.
Sorry, what page are you on?
I'll find it at the moment.
32.
Yeah, 32. Yeah. If we're actually not getting our capital project done on time, that's actually a bad thing, because we're still going to spend the money. It's not like we've spent £1 million or £500,000 or how many 100,000 less. We've actually just not done the project. So what we should do is actually know of spending that was supposed to be £8 million spending, how much was spent. So if what we planned was £100,000 over budget, that's £100,000 bad. Or if it was 7.9 million, it's £100,000 good. So it's actually this. You mix 2 things together.
Yeah. It's
In
almost like a
actual-
credit and a debit in a way,
Yeah,
isn't it?
But you actually want to know how much has been carried over effectively. Yeah, if you carried over £500,000 of work, but £500,000 of liability, that's neutral. But because we're running late, it also could hide the fact that some things are actually over budget.
Okay, can I just clarify then what you're asking me to find out?
You just want to know the value of the slippage.
Right, okay.
So use the word slippage.
Yeah.
What's the pound value of that?
Yeah, there is. Okay.
I think
I
in
heard
the
you
cabinet
mention the
report,
same thing before at
isn't it
council.
in the cabinet report the other night? Capital expenditure, what hasn't been used and what.
Is what the individual projects that Councillor Condon was talking about there.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
I'll ask Dawn to
Right,
provide
yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
no problem. Okay.
And the second point I just wanted to raise, which we whizzed over because the directors weren't here, so the second scrutiny meeting I've been to in this cycle where the directors have been in informal cabinet. I don't think they should have informal cabinet at the same time as a scrutiny meeting, because otherwise you don't get a director here. But the pension and protection overspend in the community recreation, is that connected to the leisure trust changes that happened? Because obviously that there was a lot of confusion with that, or what? Because it's a lot of people and a lot of money.
Yeah, we've already asked for that to be fed back to us anyway, so we will feed it out when we get the information.
But that might